I always forget until it's Saturday at noon. Well, hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm Alice Keeler, and I'm super excited to be partnering up with Alexis Terry. So, Alexis, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Alexis Terry. I am the founder and the lead consultant of TwistED Teaching Educational Consulting Company, where our goal is to twist the way we do teaching and learning. I am an educator with over 10 years of experience. My grade level was secondary U.S. history, specifically the 11th grade. And so right now I am honestly sitting back and excited about everything that's really happening. Because when I started teaching, I would always look at the older teachers that were working in the social studies department, and I was like, man, they've seen the fall of the Berlin Wall. They've witnessed this happen. They've witnessed that happen. And I felt like there was so much that I was teaching straight from a textbook. So the historian in me and the social scientist in me is so excited about just being able to now really teach my students from a relevant and realistic standpoint because I have witnessed and experienced it. My specialty and my area of expertise is culturally responsive teaching. I have a bachelor's in history, a master's in history, a master's in urban education, and I'm currently pursuing a PhD in urban education. And my research interests are culturally responsive teaching, culturally relevant teaching, which we'll talk about what's the difference between those two, culturally responsive teaching with technology, urban education, and teacher preparation. And so in addition to teaching high school U.S. history, I am also a adjunct professor with Relay Graduate School of Education, where I teach social studies content to resident teachers. And so I am so excited to partner with Alice Keeler. I love it. I have been following her work and using her work from my time in the classroom. And so when we came together and we linked up, that was very exciting for me. I'm also a wife to an educator and a basketball coach. And so my husband teaches high school English. And so Alice, funny story, I was analyzing his data the other day and he's like, hey, you can't be helping all these other teachers and you won't help me. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'm supposed to be analyzing your data though. But I love supporting teachers, just helping build teachers' capacity to reach and teach all students. And so I'm a mom of 4, and my 4 babies also are a reason why I do a lot of what I do.
I love your babies.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And so, we're teaming up because we have a lot of the same passions in common. We want to teach all the kids. And for me, being a math teacher, you hear a lot of times, well, I'm not a math person, or just other things that really the system does to exclude people from really feeling like they could be successful in math and in school in general. And I know that you share a lot of these same passions. Both our husbands are English teachers, and apparently we both help them with data or different things. So I'm really excited to be partnering with you. What really inspires you to do the work that you do?
Oh, man. So one of the things that I share about me, and especially in my book, this past summer, I released my first book, Real Love Strategies for Reaching Students When They See No Way Out. And in the book, I talk about my upbringing. So I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles, and my mom was on drugs and in prison my entire life, literally up until the age of 27, 28 was when she was released from prison the final time. And my dad was in and out of jail and an alcoholic growing up. My older brothers and older sister, so I have 4 siblings, and currently my sister is in a drug rehabilitation program. My oldest brother was just released from prison. My younger brother is currently spending time in prison facing 40 years. And I was the first in my family to go off. I graduated from high school. I went off, graduated from college, and went on to teach and get the advanced degrees. And the question was always, how did you do it? How was it that despite your upbringing, you were able to do X, Y, and Z? And I always brought it back to the teachers and the teachers who showed me the real love. And so it wasn't until I actually got into doing culturally responsive work that I understood what culturally relevant teaching was and how they were using it when I was in high school. But it was really because of culturally relevant educators who had this passion to reach and teach all students. And so they were building those relationships with me. They were bringing my culture into the classroom. They were giving me authentic learning opportunities and being authentic in their interactions with me. Their learning environment, when I walked into their classroom, their learning environment spoke to my specific and individual needs. They were loyal to me, meaning that I knew my teachers had my back, that they were going to support me, that they were going to go above and beyond to give me what I needed to be successful. My obstacles. When I came into a classroom, and they knew that my mom was a drug addict. They knew that my sister was at the, I remember in high school, my sister, I love being humble, open, and transparent. So this is who I am. But when I was in high school, my sister was a prostitute and stripping. And my teachers, they knew that I was having a hard time processing that and coping with that and understanding that, because in my head, where I came from, you didn't go to college. When you graduated, if you graduated, you were either going to a job or you were coming up where I came from. It was a lot of students, my peers, who they went straight to the local gang as soon as they graduated. We'll go 4 years through high school and then we'll go join a gang for the protection. And the obstacles that were present in my community, it wasn't a come to school and let's forget about it, or we have to come fix you so you can overcome this. But let's tap into your inner strengths and let's see what you have that can help with partnering with our content to help you overcome these obstacles. Most importantly, my teachers had a vision for me. They had a vision. They saw what lied beneath the surface and they tapped into that. They found out what was relevant to me. They found out what I was passionate about, and they used those things to just execute this vision where I had everything that I needed to go to college without even having the thought of college in my head. I had teachers who sat down and said, even if you don't want to, fill out the FAFSA. Even if you don't want to, we're going to take you to this college expo, because they had a vision for me that I didn't have for myself. And the most important thing was that they educated me for where we're living now. I was always told that, oh, you're loud, you're ghetto. And I remember I had a teacher who told me, what you are is you're not loud and you're not ghetto. You are articulate, you are passionate, and you are a leader. Oh, you talk too much. No, you don't talk too much. You have great ideas to share. And so when I started really digging into culturally relevant teaching, culturally responsive teaching, I was excited. I was like, that's what they did. Mr. Kennard, Miss Hyde, Miss Pearson, that's what they did. That's what they did for me. And so what you see sitting here is, like I tell people, I don't just talk culturally relevant or culturally responsive teaching because I read it in a book or I have all these degrees that are in this subject matter. I lived it. I lived it. And I know that when you tap in and understand that your students are not blank slates, everybody comes into your classroom with something. How are you going to use it? And so I know it works. So that's why I'm like, I go hard for it. I'm so passionate about that. And really, it's just knowing that when you see students who society has given up on, you see students that you may have given up on, you see students that our education system has given up on, and you say that there is something out there that can really, really meet their needs, and this is what you have to do. I'm just passionate about telling people and educators, it's not, don't get so caught up in the strategies and the tips and the tricks, because it goes back to one thing. What do you believe about all students, and how does what you believe influence what you do?
Okay, say that again.
What do you believe about all students, and how does what you believe influence what you do? And that's where it starts. Because if you believe that all students have something valuable, then you connect with each and every student. You build relationships with each and every student to bring out that value. If you believe that all students are they can learn, then you say, what do I need to do? How do I need to tap into you to make sure that what I'm trying to teach you, you can learn? If you believe that all students have something valuable and they have an asset, then you interact and you engage with them, you engage with their families, and you engage with their communities from an asset-based perspective. But a lot of us, we hold these deficit ideas, you know? And so culturally responsive teaching, like I said, I think that with people, they get caught up on, oh, I don't know. I don't have the resources to be culturally responsive. I don't know the strategies. It's just so hard to be culturally responsive because I have to do this and I have to do this and we have this curriculum. But it's not about the strategies. It's not about the tips and tricks. And it's, you don't even need resources to be culturally responsive. It is understanding that we are not blank slates. We all come into a classroom, we all enter a space speaking a certain language, right? That language is our culture. And how am I going to speak your language to give you what you need to be successful? Richard has a culture. Kimberly has a culture. Marianne has a culture. Lisa has a culture. And even if we all on this screen were black dots, each and every, or black squares, each and every square was something different behind it. Everybody has a culture: black, white, brown, gay, lesbian, transgender. Those, our students have cultures, and it's about understanding how do we speak their language so that that way they can be successful. And so I'm sorry I answered your question a long time of what inspires me, but you guys can see I love talking about this. Like I said, it comes from a place where it was really, it transformed my life. And when I tell you it transformed my life, and I want to make sure that educators have the tools, they have the resources. Like I said, now it starts with the mindset, right? You have to have that mindset shift about what do you think about all of your students? What do you think you're capable of doing? And how does that influence what you do and how you show up for your students?
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or want to share some experiences? Just want to give anyone an opportunity if they'd like to. So I'm really curious to learn more about CRT and culture responsive teaching. Your experiences are completely different from mine. Both my parents went to college. I grew up in Alaska. Then we moved to Redmond, Washington, in a pretty affluent area. And to be honest, I didn't realize people didn't go to college. I literally graduated from high school thinking everybody went to college. And until my brother dropped out his first semester, I realized other people didn't go. I literally was just in this bubble of my own. I was in a bubble. And so I just really appreciate hearing your voice, because I think, I started to get an MBA, dropped out because I got pregnant. But one of the things they said was one of the biggest mistakes is being a business owner, is thinking your customers would like you. And so I think a lot of times we come to teaching in this vein of, well, this is what worked for me and this is what I liked.
Mm-hmm.
And we forget that everyone in the room doesn't like math. Everyone in the room doesn't appreciate history and connections like you do. And not everyone had that teacher that made those connections for you. And they come with all kinds of different responses. And so I'd like to hear more about this.
Yeah. So there are two theories out there. The first theory is culturally relevant teaching. So culturally relevant teaching is Gloria Ladson-Billings. And 1995, she released an article. I'm grabbing a book. She released an article and she said, culturally relevant teaching is just good teaching. That's what it is. And then the Dream Keepers came out. And this is where, in the Dream Keepers, she really breaks down how a set of teachers were successful with culturally diverse students. And so there's three main components of culturally relevant teaching. Okay. And culturally relevant teaching is the pedagogy. And so the first thing is high expectations. Again, What do you believe about your students, and how does what you believe show up? The research out there shows that if a teacher does not believe that students are capable of passing a test, they're not going to pass the test, because the teacher is not going to give them the resources. They're not going to give them the practice. They're not going to give them the support to pass the test. And guess what? When we have low expectations for our students, they know it. They know it. And so the first thing is high expectations for all students. The second component of culturally relevant teaching is building your cultural competency, right? Getting to learn about your students, about their families, about their communities, and that language that they speak. And how can you bring that culture into your classroom? But the first thing that we have to understand is everybody has a different culture, because we all have different lived experiences. And so you can have a group of African American students. Their race and their ethnicity is not their culture. And I've made that mistake myself. You can have a group of white students. Their race and their ethnicity is not their culture. And so that's why it's important to make those connections and build those relationships with students on an individual level. But not only students, families, communities, and having those partnerships with families and communities to understand how the families and communities shape that student and how that student shows up and enters your classroom. And then the last thing, and I think this is the one that people often overlook when they're talking about culturally responsive teaching, is building students' critical consciousness to challenge the status quo. So when there are things that are happening outside of your classroom, culturally responsive educators, we don't ignore it. We don't say, okay, we're not going to talk about it. We bring those issues into our classroom, because when students leave your classroom, they still have to walk outside of your classroom and live and exist. And how are you going to use your content area, your subject matter, to prepare them to live, exist, and challenge the status quo outside of your classroom? Every single subject matter can contribute to building students' critical consciousness, because you can talk about it. And so those are the three main components of culturally relevant teaching. So this is the way when I tell people, how do you distinguish culturally relevant and culturally responsive? Culturally relevant, the key word is relevant. You make students' culture relevant to your classroom. You make students' culture relevant to your instruction. Or you make your instruction and you make your classroom relevant to students and their culture. Culturally responsive teaching is the practices, okay? So one is pedagogy, now this is practice. And culturally responsive teaching is understanding that all students are not blank slates. They come into our classroom with culture. How are we going to respond to it? How are we going to respond to it? How are we going to create learning environments that are caring? How are we going to create learning environments that empower students? How are we going to create learning environments that celebrate students? So culturally relevant is making the learning relevant and making your classroom experiences relevant to students' realities. And then culturally responsive is now responding to students' cultural needs in your classrooms and in your schools. So every student should leave your classroom, leave your school feeling seen, valued, heard, and empowered. Every student should leave your classroom feeling seen, valued, heard, or empowered. But we have to understand that seen, valued, heard, empowered, those four things look different for each and every student. What may empower Alice may not empower Lisa. What Marianne needs me to do as an educator to feel seen, that may not work for Richard.
Right. That's why teaching is so complex. You know,
Yes.
Robert Kaplinski is the go-to guy for DOK, and DOK, depth of knowledge, is really about complexity of thinking, and he gives some great examples about, something can be hard but not complex reasoning. And I really think that teaching in itself, there's just no cookbook. There's no set. You can't have a graphic organizer or a wheel of, if you do these things, you'll be a successful teacher. And it's that complexity of knowing who your kids are and making changes and adjustments, which is why online programs that's a one size fits all. We call it personalized, which really just means self-paced. Drives me absolutely bananas. The real value to me of an educator is knowing their kids and making those responsive decisions to help empower students and say, okay, this isn't working for you, then let's do something different.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I tell educators, step away from the checklist. Step away from the checklist, because the checklists have given us these misconceptions about culturally relevant and responsive teaching. We think that it's only relevant to culturally, linguistically, economically, ethnically diverse students, right? But it's not, because white students have a culture, right? Culturally responsive teaching is beneficial for every single student in your classroom, because it's saying you tap into the individual needs of that student, bring in their home culture into your classroom, and you speak their language into the classroom. And then that language that you're speaking, that the student understands, will yield academic results. And so if your teaching is not yielding academic results and students are not succeeding, then it's likely not culturally responsive. And so I always tell people, well, let's go back. I'm always going to bring you back. And that's one of the things that I love to do, is coach educators. And I like to coach educators using this model. The model is, first, let's look at the circumstance. The circumstance is always neutral, right? The circumstance is always neutral. But going to your thoughts, what you think about the circumstance is going to be what changes that circumstance. It takes it out of the neutral position. Then your thoughts influence your feelings. Your feelings influence your actions, and your actions influence your results. So going back, if we don't think that all students can be successful, well, the circumstance is student success. Our thoughts is, well, I don't think those students are going to be successful. So now we need to go back to, why do we not think those students will be successful? And then understand, once we challenge that thought, then our feelings, our actions, and our results will change once we tackle that belief. So becoming a culturally responsive educator, it really, really goes down to understanding your mindset. So anything I do, I'm always starting off with the mindset work. Let's look at it. Let's look at what we think, and how we think shapes what we say, what we do in our classrooms. We all come into a space with a bias. We all come into a space with a preconceived idea or understanding. And it is going to shape what we do and what we think, And so instead of acting like we all don't have a bias about something, we have to unpack that first. Our brains are just wired. Our RAS is wired to respond to when we think threats are around us. And so when someone is saying, oh, you have a bias, it's nothing to be ashamed about, because we all have them. We're human beings, and we want to protect ourselves. The thing that we have to get to the bottom to is, when our biases are hurting someone else, that's when it becomes problematic. When our biases are stripping away opportunities for someone else, when our biases are hindering what we do to advance someone else, right? And so it always starts with the mindset work about what you think about the students who are in front of you, your self-efficacy, what you think you're capable of doing. But don't get so caught up on a checklist, because a checklist does not apply to your classroom, right?
And so Lauren, comment in the chat. If Lauren, did you want to share? No, she doesn't. So Lauren's from Israel, and she says that even though all of her students are Jewish, but they're coming from all around the world. So it's a lot of challenges.
And so you can't make those cultural assumptions about, I was in the barbershop with my son getting his haircut, and I was talking to the barber today, and he's interested in going into teaching. And I try not to let the two mix sometimes, but you can't help being a teacher when you're a teacher sometimes. And so I had to get him, because, we were talking about, he was saying these kids, these kids from those areas, or these and their families and this. And I said, well, do you know that? Like, you've talked to every student because he was subbing. I said, so you talk to every student in their family, and you knew, just because you came from that community didn't really mean that you fully understood every family or every student in that community. And so you still have to check your cultural assumptions. I'll tell you, as a Black woman, I don't know every Black student, and I've made mistakes. Honestly, I'll tell you, I made a mistake coming in and thinking. I remember when I first started teaching, and I was like, okay, well, all I got to do is know the local songs from this community. And all I got to do is make sure that I know the local songs and that the students know I know the lyrics and all this other stuff. And guess what? I was only speaking to maybe 30% of the classroom. And guess what kids got me? The band kids. Because the band kids had a totally different culture that was not the culture that I was trying to speak to them. So I coming in from Los Angeles and then going to college and then coming and working in a school in inner city Dallas and thinking, oh, this is how you guys act because I saw this or I read this or I knew people that lived in this area. And so I even came in now it is okay to come in with a foundation and a starting point, but don't let your foundation and your starting point contribute to your lack of understanding, or your willingness to really tap in and really connect and really get to know each and every student. And so, like, if I could give you guys, where do we start? If I want to become culturally responsive, where do I start? I say relationships rooted in respect for students' cultures and communities. But here's the thing with these relationships. They don't happen the first week of school. They don't happen the first 2 weeks of school. It's kind of like dating a spouse. Me and Alice, before we decided to go into collaborating with each other, me and Alice literally have been talking once a week for, oh gosh, for a long time now. For a long time. We've gotten to know because we speak two different cultural languages. And I had to, in order to understand how I could serve Alice and serve Alice's community, I had to understand who Alice was and what she needed. And that's the same thing. But it doesn't just happen 2 weeks and then, oh, bam, now I'm going to try to come. You cannot teach what you don't know, and you cannot teach who you don't know. Because culture is fluid. And the reason why I say relationship building has to be something that is consistent and it is constant and it's happening every day is because culture is fluid. It's not, oh, this is my culture and then I'm going to be this way for the rest of my life. But we change every day. And so when you're connecting with your students every day and you're being intentional about connecting with your students every day, then you understand, how can I speak their language? Then culturally responsive educators, after they have learned who that student is and they're continuing to learn who that student is, the next thing is, what is that student passionate about? What inspires that student? What problems do this student want to solve? And now, how can I use my instruction? And this is where the whole differentiation comes in. How can I use my instruction to give Marianne what she needs, to give Kimberly what she needs, to give Laura what she needs, to give Richard what he needs? Because if I'm teaching the civil rights movement, Richard may want to walk away being able to use his activism skills or his passion for social justice work to do something in his community. But Marianne, she may want to use this information from the civil rights movement to bring about local change in the school, right? And so when you know what each and every student needs and what they want and how you can speak their language and how you can empower them, then now I can really make my instruction differentiated and key relevant to them, relevant to their families, relevant to their community. So now when Marianne is leaving my classroom, she's saying, Mom, we learned about the civil rights movement today, right? But check out what I can do with what we learned. So she's taking what she learned and she's been able to take it back into her community. She's been able to take it back into our country. She's been able to take it back into the world because we have developed and we have built her critical consciousness. And so she's understanding the society in which she lives. She's understanding the inequities. She's understanding the inequalities. She's understanding that the status quo must be changed. And now our classroom and our content has given Marianne and it's given Lisa and it's given Laura the tools that they need to go out there and actually bring about that change that they want to see. So that pretty much, when you through Twisted Teaching, that's what I do. I just help educators grow to become those culturally responsive practitioners. So the question is, what advice do you have to help teachers develop efficacy to disrupt patterns of compliance with their own practices and build a culture of culturally responsive learning pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching pedagogy? So developing your efficacy again starts with, so I think of, if you guys have a paper, do you guys mind if I do a little activity with you guys about developing self-efficacy? And this is equity work. What I want you to do is, I want you to, if you have a sheet of paper, if you don't have a sheet of paper, close your eyes and think of a big circle, okay? And I want you to think of this big circle, or on your paper, draw a big circle. And I want you to put yourself in the middle of that circle. Okay, so draw a big circle, and I want you to put yourself in the middle of that circle, okay? And I want you to think about 5 students in your classroom. Okay, you're positioned in the middle, and I want you to think about 5 students. First, let's deal with the outer workings of that circle. Out of those 5 students, write the names of the students who sit at the outer banks of that circle. You're in the middle of this circle and you have a big circle.
Physically sitting near them?
Excuse me?
What do you mean? Like they physically sit near them?
We're not physically sitting, because you're in the middle of the circle and the whole goal is to bring students closer to us, right? Think about the students who are the furthest away from you on that circle, at the outer banks, or even maybe on the outside of that circle. And just write their names where they're positioned at.
So this circle represents their connection to us.
Yes, this circle is going to represent their connection to us. So when you look at yourself position, and I'm drawing my circle, so that way I can walk through it with you guys. So I'm in the middle of my circle and I'm looking at positions. So if I'm thinking of my students who are on the outer banks of the circle, I'm going to say maybe Karen. Karen, she comes to class sometimes. When she doesn't come to class, sometimes I don't see her. When she does come to class, she's not really engaged. She won't turn on her camera. She hasn't turned in an assignment and God knows when. That's Karen. I don't feel like I can reach Karen. There's nothing really I can do with Karen. So I'm going to put Karen on the outside of that circle. I'm going to put Ryan on the outside of that circle too, because he's pretty much the same thing. I haven't seen him since the first week of school. It's the last 6 weeks. And I'm going to put Aaron on that outside of that circle too. Okay, so now, remember, I'm still in the middle. So let's see, who are those students that are they're not on the outside of the circle, they're not on the outer banks of the circle, but they're not in reachable distance still. Like, those are the ones who, they show up, but they're not consistent with showing up. Those are the ones who they turn in assignments, but when you tell them to go in the breakout room, guess what they do? They break out of class, right? Those are the ones that you're having to constantly say, hey, Kristen, here's a reminder. Can you turn this in? Hey, Kristen. So then think about those students who would be not close to you, but they're not far away from you. Who are those students? And then think about the students that are close to you. Who are those students? So now when we look at self-efficacy, right? What are you doing with the student that's close to you? Why is it that that student is close to you? What do you know about that student that's close to you? Because that student is close to you for a reason. You're speaking their language in some shape or form.
So Alexis, this is so good. We are 6 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's good. Why don't we schedule a webinar to do exactly this as the focus of the topic? So let's write down what Marianne said, and then doing this exercise. I think these would be some great ways that we can continue our partnership moving forward. You have so much information, which is why we're partnering and not having you on as a guest.
Well, hold on. Let me just close you guys out. I don't want to leave you there. Those students on the outer banks of your circle, ask yourself, what do you know about those students first? Because when you learn about those students and you now use what you've learned about those students in your classrooms, what they like, what they're inspired by, what's their home culture like, what is their community culture like, use that to start bringing them closer and closer to you. Okay. And that's one of the things I talk about in one of the online courses, making instruction and learning experiences real and relevant for students. And so when we look at our self-efficacy, the reason why we're not reaching those students is because we don't think we can. So we have to change that thought, but it starts with that student and what that student needs and how can I give that student what they need to bring them closer to me and slap dab in the middle of the circle with me.
Awesome. All right, any last minute questions? And if you guys have any requests for things that you'd like Alexis to talk about, please submit those into the suggested webinars. We definitely want to keep having these conversations. It was so good, Alexis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you guys joining me. I'm excited to work and serve you guys.
Yeah, thank you.